Hey guys, it's Mark from Erickson Machine and Performance. We got a Kawasaki 650 we're going to put together today. Ported cylinder, WSM, top end kit, and a milled head. This crank was in decent shape. The front and rear bearing were a little funny, so we replaced them. These videos are going pretty good. Thanks for all your guys' messages. I appreciate it. One thing that was asked on one of the other videos, if I use Loctite or anything on the hardware, I don't. The only thing I do is I put grease on the heads of all the hardware so that when you're torquing it down, you get a nice smooth torque and everything ends up being even. Other than the flywheel bolt, there's really no need for Loctite. And on the flywheel bolt, I just use a small drop of blue. So let's get started. As I said in the other video, I start with a cylinder upside down. I'll take the cases, set them on so it holds everything. So we'll grab the crankshaft. We'll put the seals on it. Just try to set this sideways for the time being. So I like assembly goo. This stuff works wonders. It's specifically made for O-rings and seals. It's really designed for transmissions, but transmissions are all seals. So I use it on basically all my installs. Take it, and in between the first and second seal, I gob a whole bunch of it, which helps that seal from burning up. So if you don't have this trans assembly goo, you can also use just like a bearing grease. Marine grease is really very good and it's easily available just about everywhere. Set the seals on. Now we'll set the crank back aside. So one trick I do, people always ask me about taking gaskets off. And it's tricky because you don't want to damage the cases when you do it, but it can be a pain in the butt to remove it. I use these, it's a stone. They sell them at MCMASTER car, they're around 10 bucks. They work great. You know, to remove a gasket, you just go like this. They make them in different grits. I normally use anywhere between 150 or 220 to remove the gasket. So I'll take a razor blade, scrape it first, any of the big stuff, or on cases when you have case sealant, just use the stone. It takes all of it off, and it keeps the surface perfectly flat. That's the big thing. You know, you start whooping on these or using some power tool to remove it, and you dig in, then you need more case sealant or you develop an air leak and defeats the purpose of everything. So here we go. We're going to glue the cases together. So once again, this stuff, you just need a very, very little bit. You can, me personally, when I take apart an engine, I could tell if the person that assembled it knew what they were doing by the amount of case sealant they used. If you look at your engine and it looks like there's, you know, silicone dripping out of everywhere, it's normally the person that did it didn't have a clue what they were doing. This stuff is a skill, learning how to do it and learning the right amount. These surfaces are machined, you know, almost perfectly flat, so you're just sealing the tiniest of imperfections. So there we go. And I take my finger and rub it all around. So I add a little extra drop in the corners where the seals sit. It just has a little added extra. If any drips down, you know, just wipe it off with your finger. There we go. Now we'll take our crank. Drop her in. Go. Make sure the seals are set. There we go. Now we'll take the bottom cases. So what I end up doing, I just take another little drop of case sealant just in the corners. That's it. Just make sure you get both sides of it. But once again, just the tiniest of dabs. Doesn't have to be much. We'll set the cases on. Take the case bolts. Now we'll start torquing them. So I start these at 11. So now we'll do the second torque, which is going to be 22. I'll go back over them one time to just check. Now for the 6mm hardware, which have the 10-inch head, those end up getting 69 foot-pounds. I just go right to that. So 69 inch-pounds. Drive them first in with impact. Help if I grab the right socket. So I always do these laps whenever I'm torquing something. I go with the most torque first and then back my way down. There we go. Separate from the cases. Move the cylinder aside for a sec. Make sure everything's rotating freely, which it is. Then I go through and I oil everything. Oil the rod, pin bearings, needle bearings. Just make sure when you go to start it up, you know, everything's well lubricated. You're not going to have any headaches. Take the needle bearings, put them in, lubricate them. Rotate them around so the oil gets everywhere. So also when I put the clips in, I always put them in one on each right in the middle. If you can see the cutouts for the intake. So that way when I put these pistons on, I put the clips to the inside. So that way the only clips I have to put are the outside ones. It's much easier to do. So now we'll take this piston. I put a little oil on the ring lands. You know, lubrication on break-in is key. You're trying to get everything to seat and sit properly. So having a little extra oil really helps it on first startup, where nothing gets hurt while you're breaking in your new engine. That one. The other thing I like to do, which you've seen as I started out, I like to have everything set up. So that way while you're assembling something, if for some reason you ever forgot to do something, you know, if you have all your hardware counted out ahead of time and you're done and all of a sudden you end up having an extra nut or bolt or a couple, you know that you missed a step somewhere and you know where you can go back to. Where if you just have everything in a pile and you're not really looking at it, or you don't have everything counted out, you never know. You know, even the washers, I have them glued to the acorn nuts, so that way everything just goes on together to make it a little bit easier. So now we'll set this on. We'll put the clip in. There we go. Piston number 2. Clip it over here. So I put the clip with the open side down. It's really what most manufacturers recommend. It also makes it easiest to pull the clips back out if you ever have to rebuild the engine. Make sure that you're checking side to side, that the clips are actually in, that it's not only half seated. Make sure that the pins are aiming at the intake port and also that the arrow is aiming at the exhaust port. So the other thing, I always, when I put one piston on, I make sure to put the clip on before I go to the next piston, so there's no way to ever forget a clip. Because that would end up being catastrophic. So now we'll put the base gasket on. So after any cylinder is bored, I take it, clean it in a wash tank. After it's cleaned in the wash tank, I then take it, put it in the sink, wash it with warm soapy water, and then finally, when I'm done, I take it out and use 2-stroke oil and wipe down the sides of the cylinders until there's no like gray stuff coming off of it, which is, you know, very fine filings of the cast iron from the honing process. You know, all the hash marks in the hone are little tiny scratches which can actually hold metal debris, which on fire up can really beat up the engine. So you want to try to get it, you know, as clean as you possibly can. Here we go to put the jug on. This is number 1. Guy wants to fight me. Lift her back up and reset. Well, this is being a pain for some reason. There we go. Finally, ta-da! It's the hardest one I think I've ever done. Here we go, everything's spinning nice and freely. Every once in a while, a cylinder could be a little tricky. Either that or it's late at night and my hands don't want to cooperate with me anymore. Dry everything down and then we're going to lubricate everything. So what I do, I give a nice squirt of 2-stroke oil, and I slowly bring it down the board to leave a nice film everywhere. Do the same thing on the other side. All this oil is really to just help on break-in. So all we're doing, making sure that we don't have any issues. So there's that. So now we're going to take the case hardware. So Cowie recommends 25 foot-pounds for the crankcase bolts. I actually go more on all of mine. I go, 28. I just, in general, as a rule of thumb, what I found is 8 mil hardware is, around 20 foot-pounds of torque. 10 mil hardware ends up being around 30 foot-pounds of torque. And 6 mil hardware ends up being, around 8 or 9 foot-pounds of torque. So I just feel that Cowie was a little light on what they recommend. And I found more on the 750s and 800s that the higher torque stop sleeves from cracking when you're running dry pipes. So I've just continued with it. One of the tools that you really need when you're doing cowies is a crow's foot wrench. Without this, certain of this case hardware you can't torque, especially, the outer corners, because even with a swivel socket, if you notice, you just can't get into it. You can get them on Amazon super cheap. The one big thing when you use them, so that you don't throw your torque off, you want to keep them at a 90-degree angle to your torque wrench. So, here you're going to be putting more torque. Here you're going to be putting less torque. Here is the right amount of torque. So that's the big thing when you're using a crow's foot. You want to make sure that you're at 90 degrees, either here or here when you're torquing everything. Set all this hardware down and then get to torquing it. So we're also going to step torque these. Going to switch back out of inch pounds. Go back up to foot pounds. Going to start off at 20. Start off in the middle and work your way out. The universal. Now I'm going to step up to 28. We'll go back and double check everything. There we go. They are all good. Now, head gasket and head. Clean everything, make sure nothing fell in. So up and exhaust. these we're going to do also step torque. It's going to be start off at 11 and then go up to 22. Go up to 22. The reason the Cowies are a slightly higher torque than a lot of the Yamaha 2-cylinders because they use a steel head gasket, which requires more clamping force than a fiber gasket. So some people wonder why, you know, Yamaha ends up being, you know, 18 or 19 foot-pounds and these end up being, you know, 3 or 4 foot-pounds more. That's the reason why. Go back over, check everything. There we go. She's all together. Now, one other step I like to do, this is getting a rad aluminum flywheel. These things end up cracking a lot and they get a bad rap for it. And it's really not the problem of the flywheel. The taper is slightly different, so the best way to compensate for that is actually lapping the flywheel onto your crankshaft. So you take a little bit of lapping compound, so just a very small amount, and just put it on your crank snout. There we go. Look how much better that works. So by going back and forth, what you're doing is you're, with very, very fine grit, sanding the inside of the flywheel so it matches perfectly with the crankshaft. After you're done with this, what we'll end up doing is we'll hold the coupler in a vise and we'll torque this down to spec, which I have to look it up. It's either 85 or 95 foot-pounds, I believe. Aluminum flywheels, you don't want to just set them on with an impact gun. A steel flywheel, you can get away with it. It's what I do here, and I've done for years, and never had an issue. But with aluminum flywheels, if you don't lap them and then you put too much force on them, you know, there's two wedges pushing against each other. The steel's going to win, so the aluminum cracks. Then you end up destroying, you know, a $500 or $600 new flywheel, or even used, you know, you're talking 400 plus. So this one little step, which takes, you know, 5 or 6 minutes to do properly, will save a flywheel and it'll last forever. So the big thing when you're done, you want to look at the flywheel and see that all the anodizing is gone. which means it's worn evenly, so it's sitting perfect with a crankshaft. And if you do this and then you torque it properly, you're never going to have an issue with your flywheel cracking on you. So it's a nice little tip. Get the most out of your parts without, you know, getting pissed off. A lot of people get mad at the lightweight flywheel companies saying, oh, they make a crappy part, they always crack. Same thing with MSD total loss. If you take this added step, you will very, very rarely have an issue. So once again, thanks for joining me for this video. I hope you liked it. Please like the video, subscribe. I have a whole bunch of other ideas coming out. I have one about how to rebuild carburetors, how to redo throttle shafts. So I hope you like the videos. I've been enjoying doing them. If you have any videos you'd like me to do, hit us up, comment. Be happy to help you out. Hope you guys have a good evening. Thanks again.